our special guest who's going to give some opening remarks, and that's the Honourable Andrew Wilkie MP. Mr Wilkie has been an independent Member of Parliament since 2010, first elected as a member of Denison in Tasmania and re-elected in 2013 and 2016. Following an electoral redistribution, he was elected as the independent member for Clark in 2019. Before entering politics, Mr Wilkie served with the Australian Army from 1980 to 2004. An infantry officer in the Australian Army, he commanded a company of the 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment. At the time of his entry to public life, Mr Wilkie was posted to Australia's Office of National Assessment as an intelligence analyst. In 2003, in the lead up to the Iraq War, he resigned from his position at ONA because he feared the humanitarian consequences of invasion. He opposed Australia's contribution to the 2003 invasion of Iraq under the Howard government. And among other issues, Mr Wilkie campaigned for the release of Julian Assange from prison in the UK, and he continues to actively campaign for gambling reform. So as a politically non-partisan organisation, APSF are most grateful that Mr Wilkie accepted our invitation to launch the Australian Peace and Security Forum at this webinar and this evening, and I welcome him now.
Thank you so much, Matilda, for that introduction, and thank you to APSF for asking me to participate in tonight's event. I've got to say, and this is actually a genuine comment, I'm not trying to be humble, that being invited to speak tonight has turbocharged my imposter syndrome. You know, speaking as I am alongside such eminent speakers, and also I note a number of eminent participants who are joining online. Nonetheless, when Mike Smith approached me several months ago and asked me to be involved, I think I quickly said yes, because it was self-evident to me that there is a gap in the public and political debate about Australian peace and security, which wasn't being met. And I'm hopeful, and in fact, I'm confident that APSF can fill that void. I mean, organisations like ASPI, the Institute of Public Affairs, the Australia Institute, the Lowy Institute, the Grattan Institute, the Centre for Independent Studies, all of those organisations are valuable in their own way, even when we don't always agree with them. But there is clearly a gap when it comes to having a sophisticated conversation about what security really is and what Australia really needs to achieve if it is to have genuine national security. So when Mike came and spoke to me in my office in Canberra, I was delighted to quickly say yes. You know, put me down. I'll be involved, and not just tonight saying a few words, but I would hope down the track contributing to the conversation, and maybe not so much in a really learned way like some of the other speakers tonight, but in a practical way. And as I talk about what I'm seeing in Canberra, what I'm seeing in Parliament, what I'm seeing among my colleagues when they talk about security. I think the 8 pillars that the forum brings, that Australian security is in fact a combination of political security, human security, climate security, economic security, diplomatic security, defence and military security, cyber security, and health security. I mean, that really resonates with me straight away. That it is complex, and too often our conversation in this country is simplistic and one-dimensional. So I do hold out hope and confidence that the forum will really contribute to that. You know, when I look around my parliamentary colleagues in Canberra, there's a lot of really good people there. It's not that they're bad people, but I do think that in a lot of cases their understanding of national security is one-dimensional. It's about having, you know, the biggest ships or the best armed soldiers or the fanciest fighter jets. And when the conversation turns really upmarket, we talk about cybersecurity, but we don't talk about all those other pillars. What the other 6 pillars that the forum promises to bring to the table and to highlight. In particular, I mean, I've only got 5 minutes or so to speak, so I can only just grab a couple of highlights. One of the highlights that struck out at me was when it comes to economic security, there's no understanding of resilience among a lot of my colleagues. I had a look today on the relevant website, and I see that as of July, we've got, the country's got 24 days of diesel, 21 days of aviation turbine fuel, and 31 days of petroleum fuel. I mean, there's no resilience in that. There's no economic security in that. One of the pillars is fundamentally weaken, and that's just one example before we start talking about probably one of the main subjects tonight, and that's our environmental security. I look around my colleagues and I see how they skew the issue of security in ways that suit them. For example, when ASIS spied on or planted hearing devices in the not hearing aids, hearing devices in the East Timor parliamentary building. And when I raised that after I came to the Parliament with the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security, I just was very quick to say, well, that was it in the pursuit of Australia's national security. I mean, these are really weird ways of looking at our genuine national security. I think politicians, my colleagues, are also too often misled by stakeholders in the security space. It probably helps to explain why we think that the bigger submarines or the first of class fleet refuelers, is going to meet our security. My colleagues, I think, are also they go into the tent and they drink the Kool-Aid when they're being spoken to by intelligence officials, and that misleads them as well when it comes to a conversation about security. I'm pleased to say that one of my constituents, Isabella Bond from South Hobart, alerted me just last week, and I think Isabella is participating tonight, alerted me to a paper she wrote about how the intelligence community in Australia doesn't consider climate security as a whole when it comes to thinking about and giving advice to the government about security. So thanks, Isabella, if you're listening in. And I also think about the way my colleagues, their thinking about security is skewed by ideology. I mean, the Parliament is still populated with far too many climate deniers who don't understand that climate change is probably, along with nuclear weapons, the most pressing security challenge facing our country. They probably laugh when they see an article in the media about, why is there a public debate about why the Office of National Assessments isn't releasing publicly, maybe not a fully unredacted, but a largely unredacted copy of their recent national security assessment on the effects of climate change. And of course, a lot of my colleagues are just infatuated with the United States. Now, I've got a lot of time for the United States. They're a remarkable country and we have a lot in common, but not to the point where we put our bilateral relationship with Washington ahead of everything else and skew our entire so-called national security policy towards the bilateral relationship. Heavens, when I think back to 2003 when we joined in the invasion of Iraq, I'm not sure a lot of the members of the federal parliament could identify Iraq on a map, but they could sure identify Washington on a map. That's probably the main reason why we went and joined in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. At the community level, Matilda, there's a desperate lead, and I think this is where APSF can take a really leading role, is educating the community, educating parliamentarians, so we can finally have a sophisticated public debate about what is our national security, what are the pillars of it. And maybe then my parliamentary colleagues can be more prepared to lead it at a more effective level. A couple of very quick closing remarks. I know I've only been given 8 minutes. Maybe the forum can help steer the country towards the community having ownership of our security decisions. AUKUS was done in secret. The first thing we knew about it was when the Morrison government announced it. Now, look, I did 20 years in the military. I did several years in the intelligence community. I understand we've got to keep our country safe, but surely as a country we can't pivot to having a nuclear military capability without having a public discussion and debate about it, and the Parliament debating it. And, you know, too often the community is kept in the dark. There is still no national security policy. There was no forewarning publicly of AUKUS. There is still no release of the ONI assessment on climate change. The community is kept in the dark. It doesn't have ownership of the outcomes, and I don't think that's in the public interest. So that was my best effort at dealing with my imposter syndrome. I'm really delighted to contribute tonight. I'm delighted at the prospect of working with APSF in the future, and perhaps to some degree being a representative for APSF in the Australian Parliament in the years to come. And on that note, I'm thrilled to launch the forum and looking forward to hearing what my much more learned co-panelists have got to say. Thanks, Matilda.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. We really appreciate all of those remarks. I think I just wanted to pick up really quickly on your point around educating the public and making a space for really community ownership of what is security for Australia. I think that's really something that we're seeking to do. And we really appreciate having your support and insight into, I suppose, Canberra and your colleagues and Parliament's view and what the obstacles are to overcome in terms of broadening this idea of national security to a broader peace and security and what that might mean. So thank you very much.